We're here at TEDxBeaconStreet, and I'm sitting down with Vladimir Bulovic, professor of electrical engineering at MIT and associate dean for innovation at MIT School of Engineering. He's the inventor of 25 patents that have spawned multiple startups. Technology that you have helped create is used by millions. So I have to ask, what do you do in your spare time?
That is my spare time.
Oh, okay, great.
No, we all do things we like, and I really like being with my students. I really like thinking through the problems and asking, are there ways that we can be useful to solving those problems? So that's what we do. We try to be useful.
Yeah, well, and it seems like you really have been. So we're here at TEDxBeaconStreet. Let's talk about the talk you just gave. What's the title of it, and sort of what was it about?
Well, I talked about reimagining solar technology. Very simply asking, what can we do to enable solar to be even more broadly deployed? And what are the big challenges, indeed, in today's solar technology? Because it has been penetrating very rapidly into our energy structure, and from there, what can be done to further accelerate that?
Yeah, and so even though this may seem obvious, sort of want to hear it from you. Why is this an idea that's worth spreading? That's TED's sort of mission. So why is this something you're like, I need to get this message out there?
Well, so solar is growing very rapidly. As a matter of fact, if you look since year 2000, it's about 40% growth from year to year to year in the deployment of solar, in the total installation. That's a lot. Now, we reached, at this point, 1% deployment. Now, 1% means 1% of world's electricity is met by solar generation. Doesn't sound like much, but if you're growing at 40% a year, very rapidly, a very significant chunk of the energy structure as we know it will be solar active. If that's the case, we better figure out how to deal with this. This is not anymore a mundane little technology on the side. It is really a penetrating technology that will be transformational for our energy sector as we know it. Now, if you want to do that, that sounds really cool, but are there limits to the deployment of the present forms of solar? And that's really what my talk talks about.
So I'm not an engineer or an inventor or anything, but I do, one thing I think of, so one of the limitations might be that it's not always sunlight outside, right?
That's a fantastic point.
Thank you very much.
And indeed, extremely well taken. Storage is very, very important. I'll do focus on another thing as I talk about solar. In my talk, I'm talking about what other formats solar cell can take. Because you are very familiar and very comfortable by saying, listen, solar cell is this big, dark looking thing that's on top of my roof, or maybe somewhere in a field. Well, that's not the solar that we make. And the reason why we don't make those in our lab is because we think that there are modalities, forms, that solar can take that we have not yet used before, and can allow us to much more rapidly deploy solar, even beyond what we've seen up till now. So the question then becomes, well, what is that, right? Yeah. Well, the one factor that we often omit when we think about solar, we often talk, by the way, about efficiency and how easy it is to manufacture the particular solar cell. And that's important. But the other thing that's really important is how easy it is to install a solar cell. So what we are pushing for is one very simple metric, which is weight. Can I give you a solar cell that doesn't weigh nearly anything and is so thin and maybe even invisible, so that it can be on any surface you touch, and yet you're not aware it's there? So the format, the aesthetics of whatever you happen to want to use can be activated by energy, electricity, generated by this invisible solar cell that happens to be lightweight, flexible, and indeed omnipresent as we want it. Now, you say science fiction, right?
Yes.
And it would be, unless you actually have people who set their mind to it and say, this might actually happen if I can imagine this and this and this, and so we did. So it turns out what absorbs light really, really well are paints, right? Pigments.
Okay. Yeah.
They're designed to absorb paint, to absorb light. So a paint takes the light and absorbs it and gives you heat back. Well, that's not good. Can I use that energy I absorbed and actually make electricity out of it? And that sounds crazy, but it's not. It turns out you can. All you need to do is just have a little bit of understanding, as an electrical engineer would, that any chunk of matter can be electrified and electrically activated if used the right way.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds crazy, but then again, I look at your resume and I'm like, actually, this guy might be able to pull that off.
I'm lucky to be with amazing people, and as a result, I'm able to think through the problems the way I often wouldn't have on my own, right? And so the opportunity is to actually use the molecules and ask, can I connect them to electrodes, those molecules that color the dyes that we have? Can I use those, connect them to electrodes, shine light, and see what happens? And what can happen is you can actually generate electricity. These are so-called organic solar cells using molecules or polymers. There are new ones called colloidal quantum dot solar cells, perovskite solar cells. These emerged over the last 5 to 10 years, which is relatively young for any technology, because it takes like a decade or more to go from basic idea, basic invention, to a true deployment of many, many things that many people can use. That's where we are. Yeah. We have demonstrated, us and many others around the world, that you can use molecules to make electricity by shining light onto these molecular thin films. And then we realized, well, if that's the case, how many molecules do you need? Oh, about a couple of hundred molecules. How thick is that? Well, about 1/100th of a thickness of your hair. All right, that's a fairly thin device. Yeah. So if it's so thin, can I bend it? Can I flex it? Yeah. Would it know that it's being flexed? No. It's so thin that it doesn't even know there's curvature, right? It's kind of like us standing on Earth. Yeah. We don't know that the Earth is curved because we are so short. Same thing, molecules so thin, you can bend them any way you want. Does that mean I can use substrates that are not glass? Because if I take a piece of paper and I bend it with a molecule on top of it, no. Paper is perfectly fine substrate. How about piece of plastic, saran wrap? Yeah. You can use those as well. Now you can start making solar cells, as we've shown, on extremely light substrates. Solar cells that weigh micrograms, meaning you don't even know they're there. You put them on your cloth and you wouldn't even know you're wearing them, right? Yet you would generate electricity. Or how about I choose molecules that do not absorb any of the visible light? Well, that's ridiculous. Solar cells better absorb some visible light. Well, no. We'll choose solar cells molecules that can make solar cells that absorb ultraviolet and infrared light we cannot see, yet light that can generate electricity. So yeah, just to have a right chemistry friend who can design your molecule for you, have a right electrical engineer willing to put those molecules down in the form of solar cell, test it out, work a little bit on it, and you can do it. So yeah, we've done it. And now you can make solar cells that look like absolutely nothing.
Yeah. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Pleasure.
And Vladimir Bulovic, title of his talk is Reimagining Solar Technology. You can check it out at TEDxBeaconStreet.com.